My CEO shook my hand, smiled, and said, "Thank you for everything," right before firing me. 14 days later, I sold the patent he threw away for $1.1 billion to his biggest rival. My name is Sloan Mercer, and for more than 10 years, I gave my life to a biotech company I thought was my family. I missed birthdays, vacations, and even a few chances at love because I believed in the work we were doing. I believed we were changing the future of medicine. Garrick Vance, our CEO, always told me I was the backbone of the company. I trusted him. I respected him. I thought he respected me too. But when new investors came in, things shifted. They wanted cost-cutting, they wanted numbers, and suddenly, the project I had poured my soul into was considered dead weight. Garrick called me into the boardroom one morning, and I thought maybe I was finally getting recognition. Instead, he looked me in the eye, smirked, and said, "We've restructured. Your role is no longer relevant. Thank you for everything." The board members around him didn't even look at me. It was rehearsed, cold, and humiliating. I walked out of the building that I had practically built with my own 2 hands, and it felt like I had lost everything. At first, I was shattered. I replayed his words over and over in my mind. But as I went through my records, I found something Garrick had overlooked. The patent he thought was useless was still legally tied to my name. He had been so sure of his own brilliance that he underestimated mine. I reached out to an old friend, Rowan Deek, who had become a lawyer, and he confirmed it. I own the patent. Suddenly, I was holding a weapon Garrick didn't even know existed. I wrestled with what to do, but then I saw an interview where Garrick bragged about streamlining dead weight. He was mocking me, mocking everything I had given up. That was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to just survive. I was going to make him regret every word. I reached out to Dane Corin, CEO of Garrick's fiercest competitor. Dane wasn't warm, but he respected what I had created. When I showed him the patent, his eyes widened. He knew the potential instantly. We negotiated hard, but in the end, he agreed to pay $1.1 billion. More importantly, he promised my name would be on every release. When the deal hit the headlines, Garrick's empire shook. Investors tore into him for letting something this valuable slip away. My name was everywhere, and his reputation crumbled. At a biotech summit weeks later, he cornered me. His face was twisted with anger as he hissed, "You'll regret this, Sloan." I looked him straight in the eye and repeated his own words back to him. "Thank you for everything." That was the last time I ever saw him in power. His investors abandoned him, his company spiraled, and his name faded. Mine, on the other hand, was tied forever to a billion-dollar breakthrough. He fired me with a handshake, and I left him with nothing. That's my story. I started working at the company when I was in my early 20s, full of energy and hope. I wanted to make something meaningful, something that could save lives. Every day, I arrived before most people and left long after the lights in the office had gone dim. Years went by, and my work became the foundation of the company. It wasn't just a project to me. It was proof that all the sacrifices I made actually meant something. Vacations were things other people took. I told myself I'd travel someday, but someday never came. My health slipped away quietly. I lived on coffee, skipped meals, and ignored the exhaustion piling up. Relationships ended because my focus was always on the lab. I told myself it was worth it, that the long nights and empty weekends would pay off. Garrick, the man at the top, always made me feel seen. He'd stop by my office, clap me on the shoulder, and say things like, "You're the backbone of this place, Sloan." Those words kept me going on the hardest days. I believed him. I believed he valued me. In my mind, loyalty meant something, and I thought it went both ways. Then the investors showed up. They weren't interested in people, only numbers. They didn't ask about breakthroughs or progress. All they wanted to see was what could be trimmed, what could be cut, what could be streamlined. Overnight, everything I had worked on was placed under a microscope, not to measure its potential, but to see if it was too expensive to keep alive. The thing I had poured myself into, a patent that had taken years of trial, error, and persistence, was brushed aside. They called it unnecessary, too risky, and even used the word dead weight. It felt like someone had taken a knife to everything I had built. Something I believed could change the world was tossed into a pile of rejected ideas as if it meant nothing. I didn't fight back right away. I sat there in those meetings, listening as strangers dismissed my life's work in a few clipped sentences. Garrick sat among them, calm and polished, agreeing when they labeled it a waste. It was the first time I saw a different side of him, the side that cared more about pleasing investors than standing up for his own people. Walking out of those rooms, I realized how quickly things could shift. One day, you're told you're essential. The next, the very thing that defines you is treated like a burden. That was when the first crack formed in the picture I had painted of Garrick and the company. It wasn't loyalty. It wasn't family. It was business. And in their eyes, I had already been reduced to a line they could erase from a balance sheet. When the message came from Garrick's assistant asking me to meet him in the boardroom, I felt a spark of hope. After everything I had poured into the company, I thought maybe this was the moment they would finally acknowledge my work. I walked in expecting a conversation about the future, maybe even a chance to lead the next phase of development. Instead, what waited for me was nothing I could have imagined. The room was cold, almost staged. Garrick sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by board members whose faces gave nothing away. They didn't look curious or interested or even mildly engaged. They looked like people who had already made up their minds long before I entered. That uneasy silence pressed down on me before Garrick even spoke. Then, in his smooth, rehearsed tone, he said the words that knocked the air out of my lungs. "We've restructured. Your role is no longer relevant. No build-up. No explanation. Just a simple dismissal, as if years of dedication could be erased with a single sentence." The board members nodded along, not one of them willing to meet my eyes. I tried to speak, to explain what the project could still achieve, how much progress had already been made. My voice was steady at first, but inside I was scrambling, desperate to make them see sense. Before I could even finish, Garrick leaned back in his chair, gave that trademark smirk, and cut me off. "It's business, Sloan. Thank you for everything." His words felt rehearsed, like lines he had already practiced in front of a mirror. That smile stung more than the announcement itself. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't regret. It was arrogance. He wanted me to see that he had the power, that I was nothing more than a piece he could push off the board whenever it suited him. The people in the room followed his lead, scribbling notes or glancing at their watches, as though the discussion of my entire career was just a minor agenda item. I don't remember what I said back, or if I said anything at all. I just remember standing up and realizing that my legs felt heavier than they ever had before. Walking out of that boardroom, I felt stripped bare. The halls I had walked for years now felt unfamiliar, like they belonged to someone else. Colleagues avoided my eyes as I passed, as though they already knew what had happened and wanted no part in it. When I reached the front doors, I paused for a moment and looked back. That building had been the center of my world. I had believed in it, given myself to it, trusted it. But now, staring at those glass walls from the outside, all I felt was humiliation. I left with nothing more than Garrick's empty words echoing in my mind. "Thank you for everything." The days after leaving the company were a blur. I stayed in my apartment, curtains drawn, hardly able to face the world. Sleep was impossible, and when I did drift off, I woke up with my heart pounding, hearing Garrick's voice in my head. My mind swung wildly between sadness and rage. One moment I'd wonder if all the years had meant anything. The next I'd picture the smirk he gave me as if firing me was some kind of game. That expression became a spark that kept burning brighter the more I thought about it. I tried distracting myself, but nothing worked. Even simple tasks like making coffee felt hollow. I kept asking myself how someone I trusted so much could treat me like I was disposable. The humiliation dug deep, and yet beneath it was a growing anger I couldn't shake. I didn't want pity. I didn't want comfort. What I wanted was to prove that he had been wrong about me. One evening, I sat at my desk surrounded by stacks of files I had brought home over the years. Old notes, drafts, technical papers, things I kept out of habit more than anything else. I began sorting through them, hoping the act would calm my mind. That's when I stumbled on the original paperwork tied to the patent. I read it once, then again, slower this time, my eyes locking on a section I had almost forgotten about. The details were clear. The rights were in my name. The company hadn't claimed full ownership in the early stages, probably because Garrick had thought it would be easier to finalize later. He must have assumed I'd never notice, or maybe he didn't think it mattered. But it did matter. It changed everything. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that grief was making me see what I wanted to see. But the more I studied the documents, the more certain I became. It wasn't just a draft or some old agreement. It was binding. Legally, the patent wasn't his to discard. It was mine. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. My hands shook as I held the papers, realizing the shift in power. Garrick had believed I was powerless, but in his arrogance, he had overlooked a detail that put me in control. He had underestimated me in the worst possible way. That discovery became my turning point. The fog in my head began to clear, and the anger that had been eating me alive sharpened into focus. I wasn't broken anymore. I was armed. The very thing they had dismissed as useless was the one thing that could change the game. And now it wasn't just about survival. It was about making sure Garrick learned that the person he had cast aside was the one holding the key all along. I didn't want to trust only my own eyes, so I reached out to someone who could give me answers I couldn't argue with. Rowan Deek had been a close friend back in college before he went to law school. We hadn't spoken much in years, but I knew if anyone could cut through the confusion, it was him. When I called, he agreed to meet without hesitation. Sitting across from him in his office, I laid the documents on his desk. He took his time reading through them, silent and focused, occasionally scribbling notes. My heart pounded as I waited, afraid that I had misunderstood something or built false hope on paperwork that didn't mean what I thought it did. Finally, he looked up and said the words I had been desperate to hear. The patent was mine, without question. Every clause, every line confirmed it. The company had no claim. Garrick had no control. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. The next question was what to do with it. Rowan asked if I planned to develop it on my own or license it to someone else. I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I hadn't thought that far. For days afterward, I kept going back and forth. Part of me wanted to walk away completely, to file the papers away and never let Garrick's shadow touch my life again. But another part of me, the louder part, couldn't let go of the humiliation. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about recognition anymore. It was about the way he had dismissed me, the way he had thrown away my years of work as if they were worthless. That wound ran deeper than any financial loss. Burying the patent might have freed me from the mess, but it wouldn't erase what he had done. The choice became clear one night while I was watching the news. Garrick appeared on the screen in a polished interview, smiling for the cameras. He spoke about cutting unnecessary baggage and streamlining dead weight. The words were sharp, deliberate, and I knew exactly who he was talking about. He wasn't just ignoring my work. He was mocking me publicly, making himself look like a visionary for discarding what I had created. Hearing that, something in me hardened. I couldn't stand by and let him rewrite the story. He thought he had won, that I was finished. But he was wrong. I finally knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to vanish quietly. I wasn't going to let him parade around as if he had made the right call. With the patent in my hands and proof of my rights confirmed, I made my choice. I would fight back, not with words, but with action. Garrick had closed the door on me, but I had found another path, and this time it would lead straight through him. I sent a short, careful message through an encrypted channel I knew would reach the right desk. I didn't call. I didn't use the company line. I asked for a private meeting and gave a neutral location, a quiet old hotel with a piano in the lobby. He accepted. When Dane arrived, he was lean and precise, the kind of man who looks at everything twice before deciding. He wore no loud logos, but there was an edge in the way he held himself. He listened without interrupting as I laid out what I had brought, watching my hands more than my words. He didn't gasp or overreact. Instead, he asked sharp questions about timelines, technical hurdles, and possible markets. Every question showed he understood what real opportunity looked like. He didn't flatter me. He tested me. He asked why I'd come to him instead of going public. I told him my goal. I wanted the work used properly, and I wanted accountability for those who had thrown it away. He nodded slowly, as if weighing not just profit but pride. Then he surprised me. He said flatly that he admired people who built things instead of just buying them, and that he respected courage when it was paired with skill. That was the first hint he wasn't just another executive with a checkbook. Negotiations were businesslike and fast. He sketched offers on a cocktail napkin: development support, a strategic team from his labs, access to markets his company already served. He asked for exclusivity for a set period, and I countered with strict conditions about public recognition and oversight on how the technology would be presented. He paused, then adjusted the terms. He wanted a clear path to productization. I wanted safeguards so the work couldn't be buried or reused under someone else's name. He proposed a staged plan: initial funding to accelerate testing, a joint press strategy, and a governance board that included independent scientists. I pushed back on vague promises. I wanted clauses that were enforceable: named credits in patent filings, scheduled public updates, and penalties for any attempt to hide or downplay the project. He listened, never raising his voice, and then offered language that matched my demands. It felt like bargaining with someone who knew both the law and the newsroom. At one point he smiled and said, "You've thought this through." It wasn't praise so much as recognition. He respected preparation. He respected that I had options and the discipline to choose them carefully. We talked about timelines in weeks and milestones in measurable tests, not vague ambitions. He asked about media control. I said I would only agree if announcements were coordinated and factual. He agreed to that too. Before we left the hotel, we sketched a preliminary framework and exchanged secure contact details. We did not sign anything that night, but we left with a clear path. Technical due diligence, legal terms to draft, and a public narrative to prepare. He didn't promise the earth in a single sentence. Instead, he offered a plan and the machinery to follow it. I walked away knowing I had found an ally who moved like a strategist. Not sentimental, not careless, but willing to put real resources behind an idea he believed could win. That was enough to start. The back and forth with Dane's team stretched over days. Every clause was dissected, every word tested. His lawyers pushed for broader control. Mine pushed back with equal force. There were moments when it seemed like we might walk away from the table, but I held firm. I knew exactly what I wanted, and I wasn't going to leave with anything less. The final number was placed on the table with no hesitation, 1.1 billion. It was bold, it was undeniable, and it proved how valuable the work really was. But money alone wasn't enough for me. I leaned forward, made my voice clear, and said what mattered most. My name had to be tied to the technology in every announcement, every document, every product release. It wasn't just about recognition. It was about reclaiming the truth. Dane studied me for a long moment. His expression didn't shift much, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't the kind of man who enjoyed giving ground, but he understood why I was insisting. Finally, he gave a short nod. His team adjusted the language, guaranteeing visible credit in every channel the company controlled. That clause was the victory I had been waiting for. The signing itself was almost quiet. Papers were stacked neatly, pens laid out, signatures exchanged in silence except for the shuffle of pages. Dane wrote his name with a steady hand, then set the pen down with a faint smile. "This will bury him," he said, almost casually, as though he were stating a fact rather than celebrating a triumph. Hearing those words didn't bring me joy in the usual sense. What I felt instead was weight lifting from my chest. For weeks, I had lived under the shadow of humiliation and betrayal. Now, holding the signed agreement in my hands, I felt control returning. I wasn't the discarded employee anymore. I was the owner, the decision-maker, the one steering the future. Walking out of that office, I could finally breathe. The patent wasn't just a forgotten file in my drawer. It was a billion-dollar deal, and it carried my name with it. Garrick had written me off as irrelevant, but soon the industry would see the opposite. Every headline would tell the story, and none of them would erase me. The sense of power wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was quiet, steady, like a fire that burned deep instead of fast. For the first time since that awful meeting in the boardroom, I wasn't looking back in shame or doubt. I was looking forward, armed with proof that Garrick's judgment had been wrong. And this time, the world would see it too. The announcement came early on a Monday morning. Dane's company released a statement to every major outlet, and within hours the news spread like wildfire. "Groundbreaking patent acquired for $1.1 billion, the headlines read. Beneath the bold numbers was something even more powerful, my name. For the first time, the work was linked to me publicly, not hidden behind a corporate front. Industry reporters wasted no time. Articles poured out one after another, each highlighting the scale of the deal and the potential of the technology. Analysts called it a turning point, a bold move that could shift the entire biotech market. Television anchors spoke my name as they discussed how the acquisition had blindsided everyone. Overnight, I went from being quietly dismissed to being recognized as the creator behind something revolutionary. The impact on Garrick's side was immediate. Investors demanded answers, calling emergency meetings and pressing him to explain how such an asset slipped through his fingers. "How could you let this go?" one of them reportedly shouted during a call that leaked to the press. Their anger was public now, and no polished smile could cover it. Stock prices began to dip. Commentators questioned his leadership. The board that once sat behind him with blank expressions was suddenly restless. For years he had carried himself as untouchable. but now cracks were visible for everyone to see. While Dane's company was praised for its vision, Garrick's was painted as careless and short-sighted. The contrast was striking. On one side, a competitor celebrated for making the deal of the year. On the other, a CEO accused of incompetence and neglect. It wasn't just a financial blow, it was a direct strike at his reputation, the very thing he had always guarded so carefully. For me, it was surreal to watch. Friends and colleagues sent me screenshots of articles, interviews, and social media posts. My inbox filled with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all congratulating me. Some were surprised, others impressed, but all of them acknowledged what Garrick had refused to see. I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't gloat, but I couldn't ignore the satisfaction either. The same industry that had once nodded along as Garrick dismissed my work was now treating it as a billion-dollar breakthrough. The shift was undeniable, and it had all happened in a matter of days. From the outside, it looked like a corporate shakeup. To me, it felt like justice being written in real time. Every headline, every broadcast, every mention of my name was proof that he had been wrong. Garrick's empire trembled, and mine was finally taking shape in plain sight. The summit was crowded, full of polished suits, glossy displays, and endless conversations about the future of science. I had just finished speaking on a panel when I felt someone step into my path. I didn't need to look twice to know who it was. Garrick stood there, jaw tight, eyes burning with resentment. He wasn't the confident figure I remembered from the boardroom. His shoulders were stiff, his smile forced, and the sharpness he once carried seemed dulled by anger. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You'll regret this, Sloan," he said, each word dripping with bitterness. It was more threat than statement, the kind of thing meant to rattle me. But instead of fear, I felt something else, a calm certainty that he no longer had power over me. I didn't raise my voice, didn't let emotions slip through. I simply looked him in the eye and answered with the same words he had used to discard me. "Thank you for everything." The moment hung between us, and I could see the impact land. His face tightened, as though I had struck him without lifting a hand. He had expected tears, anger, or maybe even guilt. What he found was indifference, and that hurt him more than any outburst ever could. He tried to recover, straightening his tie, glancing around as though hoping no one had noticed. But people had. Whispers carried through the hallways, and eyes followed him as he walked away. The story of the billion-dollar deal was still fresh, and now this public encounter only added to his humiliation. In the weeks that followed, the fallout grew worse for him. Investors who once praised his leadership began pulling out, selling shares, and moving their money elsewhere. Articles labeled him careless, short-sighted, and arrogant. Each headline chipped away at the image he had built so carefully. Invitations to panels and interviews started disappearing, replaced by silence. Meanwhile, I continued my work with a steadiness he couldn't shake. My name appeared in journals, my project moved forward, and my voice carried weight at every event I attended. The gap between us widened until he was barely mentioned at all, a fading figure in a world that no longer saw him as relevant. Looking back at that summit moment, I realized it wasn't about revenge in the way people imagine it. It wasn't shouting or pointing fingers. It was showing him, with nothing but a calm reply, that he no longer defined me. He had underestimated me, and now the world saw the truth. Garrick's fall wasn't loud. It was slow, steady, and unstoppable. And it began the moment he heard his own words thrown back at him. When everything settled, I finally had time to sit with what had happened. The noise of reporters and the rush of meetings faded, and I could breathe without feeling like the ground was shifting under me. I didn't feel the urge to celebrate loudly or rub anything in. What I felt was steady, like a long exhale after holding my breath for years. The patent deal gave me more than wealth. It gave me back something I thought I had lost the day Garrick pushed me aside, my sense of worth. For so long, I let his words echo in my mind, as though they defined who I was. Now, when I saw my name attached to the technology in journals and press releases, it reminded me that the work was mine, and the world finally saw it too. That was the true win. I came across articles about Garrick in the weeks that followed, and the contrast was sharp. He was no longer the polished figure boasting about growth and vision. He was on the defensive, scrambling to convince investors to stay. Some photos showed him leaving buildings with his head down, avoiding cameras. Reports mentioned desperate attempts to secure funding that never came through. Slowly, he began to vanish from the headlines altogether, replaced by newer leaders and fresher ideas. It struck me how quickly influence can fade. For years, Garrick had acted like his position made him untouchable. Yet the moment he underestimated the wrong person, his carefully built image cracked. It wasn't a dramatic collapse in a single day. It was a steady decline, a reminder that arrogance has a cost. On my side, life began to look different. I wasn't chained to late nights out of obligation anymore. I chose the projects I wanted to take on. I surrounded myself with people who valued ideas instead of titles. Every step felt lighter because I was no longer chasing approval from someone who only saw me as expendable. I didn't hate Garrick anymore. That part of my story had ended. What stayed with me was the lesson that strength isn't about clinging to a place that doesn't respect you. It's about knowing when to walk away and finding the courage to build something better. As I thought about the journey, one sentence came to mind, the same one that marked the turning point. He fired me with a handshake. I left him with nothing. That's my story. It wasn't about revenge in the end. It was about reclaiming my voice, proving to myself that I was never dead weight. And with that knowledge, I could finally move forward, free and unshaken. Do you think I made the right choice by selling the patent to Garrick's rival? Or should I have just walked away and started over somewhere new? I really want to know what you think in the comments. And if you like hearing stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.